Hello and welcome. I'm Sam Califer, your host for Vision, the show all about the College of Arts and Sciences. Today I'm joined by Dr. Dipangkar Dutta. He is a professor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy, and he is a nuclear physicist who recently wrote a couple of articles for the national news outlet The Conversation, where he describes some very complex terminology at the cutting edge of science, and he explains them to a general audience, and they're really well written. And so I want to have him on to talk about those articles as well about his research in general. So Dr. Dutta, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Sam, and it's very nice to finally meet you, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Definitely, yeah, we've been emailing with each other. I was very happy to see that the conversation articles happened and that they asked you to write another one, and so really happy to get to speak with you about that today. But to start, I was hoping you could just introduce yourself, tell us what you research and how you came to do so here at Mississippi State.
Sure. So my name is Dipangkar Dutta, and amazingly, this is my 20th year at MSU.
Congrats.
And so my field of research is experimental nuclear and particle physics. And what we are trying to do is basically understand and look at the structure and properties of subatomic particles in the hope of understanding why they have these properties and what makes them tick, basically. Why do they behave the way they do? The main goal of all of that is to figure out the strong nuclear force. This is the force which holds atomic nuclei together, and we want to understand it from first principles. And this is the force which makes matter stable and allows us to exist. So that's why it's an important challenge.
Sure.
And so most of this research that I do is at an accelerator called Jefferson Lab, which is an electron accelerator in Newport News, Virginia. And the accelerator there, and in fact, I have been working there for over 30 years now. I started as a graduate student, and in fact, my thesis experiment was the first experiment to be completed at Jefferson Lab, which was a brand new lab at that time. And the special thing about Jefferson Lab is that, or J-Lab as it is called, is that it has the most intense particle beam in the world. And that allows us to look, to basically look at the subatomic realm with very high precision and look for subtle phenomena. And one of the analogies that is used in our field is to say that if you look at particle colliders like the Large Hadron Collider in Europe, they are smashing particles together and building the picture from the debris of these collisions. But in our case, because of this high intensity beam, it's like using a very sharp knife, take thin slices and delicate slices and build the picture based on these slices. So that's the analogy we use. So we don't have the highest energy, but we have the most intense beam in the world. As I said, I came to MSU about 20 years ago, and I was recruited by Dr. Jim Dunn, who is now in the provost's office. He's a VP in the provost's office, and he was looking to build. He is also a physicist working at Jefferson Lab, and he was trying to expand the group, and so I came as part of that team and trying to do a very complex experiment at J-Lab. And my role was to build a new type of detector, which I'll tell you a little bit later. So that allowed me to establish a detector lab at MSU, which has been very fruitful, and we have been able to use that to run a bunch of different very high impact experiments over the last 2 decades. And now the group has also expanded to include 4 faculty who work at Jefferson Lab, and we have an army of students and postdocs who also help us with that. So that's the whole story, I guess.
It's so cool to look into your world and, you know, the idea of running or being at a high electron beam and all of that, you know, it's so out of the world for like a normal person like me, I guess. But it is so interesting, and you have all of that knowledge, but I really appreciated that you wrote these articles that explain some of this terminology and these concepts to a general audience. And they were, congrats, they were really well written. Before we got on camera, we were talking about how physics and astronomy can be romantic in a way because you're just trying to understand the universe and all the complexities in it. And I think if someone read those articles, they would kind of get that sense. You talk about things like dark matter and antimatter and virtual particles. Yeah, I would just love to hear what was that process like, and how did you go about trying to explain that kind of stuff to a general audience?
Sure, and I've always felt that being able to explain the science we do to the general public is a very important task for every scientist, because not only for the health of the science, but also to have a well-informed public who can then support our work that we are doing, and which is an important enterprise. And so I try to do this whenever I can. And so when you approached me about writing this article, I was a little apprehensive because I thought it might take a lot of time. But anyway, I took on the challenge, and as you know, these concepts have been around for a while. So collecting all the facts and problems with them was the easy part. That's very easily available. One can collect that. And the difficult part was to take away all the jargon and weave these facts into a story and explain it in simple terms and build some kind of analogies. Like for example, we had this video game analogy and the playground analogy. All of those things came about when we tried to remove the jargon and weave it into a story, like I was saying. And of course, the editors helped really. After our first draft, they had these questions which we weren't even thinking about, because it looks like, to us, it is kind of obvious. But when they asked the questions, they said, oh, this is a gap, this is in the story. So we fill it in, and that helped a lot. And so it was a very fun and enjoyable experience, I think, and I would definitely recommend it to anybody else who wants to try it.
Yeah, well, listen to that. And no, definitely. And when I was reading it, the analogy, there's a lot of metaphor there that does help explain it, and it gives you something to anchor into and make sense of it. So yeah, I thought the articles were great. I hope people go read them. A through line that I noticed, especially with the virtual particles and the dark matter, is we don't really know what it is. We know that it's there, or we can calculate it, but there is a need for creativity and imagination, essentially, to be able to deal with that you don't know. But I think there is a misconception that scientists aren't creative and imaginative, but your articles made me think the exact opposite. So I would just love to hear your thoughts about that. Are scientists imaginative, creative, or not?
So yeah, I completely agree with you that there's a misconception of both the science and creative thinking, and if you consider it to be in opposition to each other or not connected, because science is essentially figuring out new ideas or finding new connections with old ideas or existing ideas, and that's what science is about, and that is directly related to creative thinking. In fact, in the most part of science is to come up with a novel hypothesis and then make a connection, design some kind of elegant experiment, and then connect it to the observations and find new connections with these observations, and then come up with a theoretical framework which explains all of this together. So all of that is very creative process, and it should help to have an open mind about these connections. And to me, I think even the mundane and routine stuff that we do in science can be creative. It requires creativity to continue doing them. And also, to me, it seems it's a mindset of having curiosity rather than the end product, which makes it creative.
There is a term in literature called negative capability, which is an artist's ability to sit in the mystery and the complexity and the paradox and not have to immediately look for an answer, and instead sit and meditate and find a deeper truth, perhaps. And I think that's kind of what the scientific method is. It's trying to find something new. So yeah, just so interesting to me. And I was wondering if there was a moment in your own career where a success or an insight happened more from creative thinking than necessarily like analysis or calculation.
Sure, yeah, that happens quite a bit. And but the first one which comes to mind is from the beginning of my career at NSU. As I was telling you earlier, that we were trying to build this novel detector, which would, the reason why it had been novel, because we're going to use it in an environment which has lots of radiation coming into it. And so usual detectors would get destroyed in minutes,
Right.
while we needed to run this experiment for 2 years or so. So it had to survive in this high radiation environment for over 2 years.
Sure.
And so while thinking about what material would be able to withstand this kind of environment, I thought about diamonds, which is one of the hardest material that we know about it.
Sure.
And so that turned out to be the correct idea. And of course, making the detector and developing the detector took several years, and doing all the calculations and all the hard piece of work took a long time. But ultimately, that turned out to be the right idea, and
Yeah.
it came from this tiny spark of
you
an
had
idea.
a hunch,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you followed it. Yeah, and it ended up being correct.
Yeah.
So cool, and I think that is what is at the heart of science, and I think people get lost in that. Oh, I got to do math, I got to run a lab, but no, you're discovering something and you're figuring out the universe, and so I think that's just really cool. But now that we're talking about it, you know, I think it is needed, but I wonder where you draw the line, you know, as far as what's the difference between studied imagination and maybe just unfounded speculation, and what's the difference, and how do you draw that line?
Sure. So I think we should always have an open mind, like I was saying, and there shouldn't be any hard line or cut and dry ideas. But even given that, in physics, what it usually turns out is that any new speculative idea has to have some kind of mathematical framework which supports it, so that you can make these predictions which can be tested. That's what would separate a good idea from just plain speculation, is
Right.
being able to show experimentally through experiments and by observation that it is correct. And so in order to make a prediction, you have to have a mathematical framework which supports it. And it turns out that this is the usual way which we try to differentiate between them. And in fact, some theoretical physicists find that there is beauty in the math. But as an experimentalist, I think the beauty and elegance comes in designing these experiments to test these ideas. But nonetheless, we keep an open mind and try to look for ideas even if they are falling outside this framework. And note that it also has to jive with this millennia worth of observations that we have. It's not that physics was born just yesterday.
Yeah.
It has been several millennia of observations which have been made, and
You
it
have
has
to
to be
take
consistent with that.
all of that's been built and have that novel thought and push it one step forward.
Absolutely. And again, we want to keep an open mind and look for ideas that do not fall within this framework, but as of now, we haven't found any that really doesn't follow this framework.
Yeah.
Although it is not an absolute or a hard line, but still, it just, from experience, it turns out to be that way.
Sure.
Yeah.
Dr. Dutta, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
So cool to talk to you. And thank you all for joining me for this episode of Vision. We'll see you next time.
Okay.